Okay, tonight's speaker is Greg McDonald, author and speaker. He's the author of 18 books, including the widely acclaimed Cockeyed Charlie Parkhurst, the West Coast's Unusual Stage Wheel. Tonight's talk will be on Yosemite's Unsung Hero, Jesse Benton Fremont.
Thank you. Thank you, Art. You know, one of my real heroes is Mother Teresa. And one of the things that Mother Teresa said was, Christ is in every smile that you give someone. And you know, when you think of the Buena Park Lions Club, you think of all the smiles that you're giving to people. The Buena Park Lions Club is known probably internationally for Silverado days, because what I understand is that you raise over $100,000, or you've raised $100,000. Is that $100,000 annually?
Yes.
That's what I read, and I said, whoa, that's amazing, because all that money comes back to the community, comes back to the schools. You know, when you think of what Buena Park Lions also does, as far as helping hearing impaired, not just sight, but hearing impaired through the school districts with the funds that they raise. It goes on. I could spend the whole time here talking about Buena Park Lions. But also Historical Society, the Buena Park Historical Society. They're saving history. And that's so important because history is cyclic. It's a cylinder. It repeats itself. And if you understand where you came from, you can understand where you are and where you're going. Pretty darn accurately, too. And I'm going to talk to you tonight about a woman who was an unsung hero that I doubt any of you, well, you might have heard of this woman's name, but you didn't hear this story because it's not out there. And it took 10 years of research. And I don't know why someone didn't write this 110 years ago when she passed away. But this woman actually helped save Yosemite before John Muir had ever heard of Yosemite. I couldn't believe this. Took 10 years of research trying to piece this story together. Basically, it's a story of Jesse Benton Fremont. I know a lot of you probably have heard of Jesse Benton Fremont because she was the wife of John C. Fremont. You know, the famous Western Pathfinder, Fremont, California.
Right.
Do any of you know who his scout was, by the way?
Tonto.
Tonto, no. No, it wasn't Tonto. It was Kit Carson. Probably the most famous scout there was, you know, as far as Carson City, Carson Lake. They're just, these guys were just so phenomenal, but she was the woman behind both of these guys. She wrote their autobiographies.
Wow.
This woman was absolutely brilliant. What happened was that in 1858, she moved with her husband to Bear Valley. Do any of you know where Bear Valley is, outside of Mariposa? And she fell in love with Yosemite. She'd never seen Yosemite before. Have all of you seen Yosemite, by the way? How many? Raise your hand if you've been to Yosemite. Isn't it, without a doubt, one of the most beautiful spots you've ever seen? But you know what? She was alarmed. Now, this is 1858. She was alarmed because she saw people sawing down 2,000-year-old redwood trees for homesteading, not out of malice. They were building homes in Yosemite Valley. She saw people creating horse ranches, cattle ranches, sheep ranches, planting orchards. And she says, oh my gosh, something has got to be done to save this valley or it'll become totally private. There'll be nowhere for anybody to come and look up at the beautiful waterfalls and Half Dome and the whole thing. This woman was amazing. What did she do? She started inviting people to stay overnight at her house. Go see this place called Yosemite. Only the Native Americans and the people living in the area and some of the people in the gold rush coming to California had ever heard of Yosemite. People in the other states and other countries had not heard of it. So she got Horace Greeley. Do you all know who Horace Greeley is? Do you ever remember that from your civics class? What did he say to? He said, "Go west, go west, young man, go west." He'd never heard of Yosemite. He stayed overnight at her house. He went and saw Yosemite, and he said, wow, this is the most beautiful place on earth. So he went back to New York, where he was a journalist and publisher and everything else, and starts writing about Yosemite. Have you ever heard of Richard Henry Dana Jr.? Have you ever heard of Dana Point? Named after him. Are there any sailors in the audience? There's a sailor. Richard Henry Dana, what sailor? Noah. His name is Noah, correct? Are you building an ark? Sort of. Okay, well, stay close to this man. If he's the only sailor, you want to stay close to him. Richard Henry Dana Jr. built, or he wrote, actually, the best book on sailing ever written, most people say, 2 years before the mast. See, you knew that. This woman, Jessie Benton Fremont, did this with a lot of people, getting them to come, stay at her place, look at Yosemite, get on the bandwagon. In fact, her husband built her a house overlooking the Golden Gate, which John C. Fremont actually named. And she started having Sunday dinners in San Francisco at this house, inviting artists, people like Bret Harte. You ever heard of Bret Harte? He was a Western writer that she helped make famous because she was already writing for like Atlantic Monthly, Harper's Magazine. She was a terrific writer. How about a man named Herman Melville? Anyone ever heard of him? Moby Dick? This is like a civics. There must be, well, there's a teacher over there, I know, Lynn. Are you taking, you seeing who answers these correctly? Okay. You know, Herman Melville would come when he was in town to these Sunday gatherings. At these Sunday gatherings, artists and politicians, it was kind of the in thing to do in San Francisco. She had a photographer who was so much more famous than Ansel Adams at the time, but most people have forgotten totally about him now. Carlton Watkins. You ever heard that name? Carlton? Most people have never even heard the name Carlton Watkins. He was a phenomenal Ansel Adams type of a photographer. He was the first photographer to actually photograph every aspect of Yosemite and show its beauty. And they started getting these, excuse me, these articles in newspapers, magazines, photo exhibits in galleries in New York City, and even at the Paris International Exposition. They were showing off these photos of Yosemite. So the rest of the United States, the rest of the world starts seeing Yosemite. Boy, we got to save this place. It's phenomenal. She's like the hub, and everyone else that I've been talking about is like spokes. There was a minister named Thomas Starr King, who a lot of you maybe have heard of because he was a phenomenal speaker and even a better freelance writer. He would write for like the Boston Evening Standard, papers along the East Coast. She got him to go see Yosemite, fell in love with it, came back to her house, by the way, where she let him write sermons and articles in an area of her house set aside just for him, overlooking the Golden Gate. And he was going to write one story on Yosemite, but he was so enamored with it that he ended up writing 8 stories for the Boston Evening Standard in a 1-month period. So you kind of get the message of what this woman is doing. There was a San Francisco businessman named Israel Ward Raymond, and they got pictures from Carlton Watkins, gave them to Israel Ward Raymond, and he wrote a letter to U.S. Senator John Conness of California requesting that he create a bill that would save Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. Yosemite Valley is where the 4 million people today go every year. It's where they stay. Most of them don't even leave the valley. Most of the visitors there. So without that valley, you got a heck of a problem in trying to see Yosemite. So this group that I was telling you about that met at her house every Sunday, they start lobbying Congress. In fact, she had Oregon Senator Baker, who was a friend of Abraham Lincoln's, to her house in San Francisco where they discussed Yosemite. And he went and started putting the bee in the ear of Abraham Lincoln. This woman actually lobbied Abraham Lincoln one-on-one 5 or 6 times, and you're saying, what? How in the heck could she ever get Abraham Lincoln? He was busy with the Civil War and everything. Jessie Benton Fremont's father had been the most powerful Democrat in Washington, Senator Thomas Hart Benton of Missouri. And he had taken her as a 16-year-old girl to meet with presidents, to go in the smoke-filled rooms and see how politics really operates. So this woman knew how to get the right people together and give them the credit for change. So she was just a phenomenal woman. And in fact, on June 30th, 1864, President Lincoln signed the legislation that saved Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias. Now you cannot believe how significant this was. Never on earth had a federal government saved scenic lands for future generations. And it not only led to environmental movements, but it led to the entire state and national park movement. And so you say, well, why hasn't anybody given this woman credit? There's not even a plaque in her honor at Yosemite. And the answer is she didn't want any credit. She was a good woman that just wanted to make change. She didn't want her name anywhere or whatever. She wanted to save Yosemite before John Muir had ever heard of Yosemite. 4 years after this grant, John Muir comes to California and hears about Yosemite and goes and sees it, falls in love with it. And for most practical purposes, people think he was the savior of Yosemite. In 1890, John Muir, working with his friends, was able to help create Yosemite National Park. But what people don't realize is Yosemite National Park was outside of what was Yosemite State Park, which is what Jesse had saved. You see, the federal government had no parks department. The states had no parks department. So Lincoln had given, they'd given the Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove to the state of California, and the governor appointed 8 men to oversee it, and became a state park. If you go down to Bolsa Chica State Beach or Huntington State Beach and you look at the truck and you see the bear on the side of the truck, it says since 1864, only because of Jessie and her friends. So when Yosemite National Park was created in 1890, outside of the state park area, it was phenomenal. And unfortunately, she passed away in 1902. Less than 4 years later, the state gave back their park to the national government to be included in what is today Yosemite National Park. It's just an incredible, incredible story. And I couldn't believe that there's no recognition for her anywhere. So I said, by gosh, like a good Buena Park Lion or a good Buena Park Historical Society member, I'm going to do something about this. So I broke the story in Sierra Heritage magazine last year, which is the Bible of the Sierra Nevadas. It's a beautiful Life magazine size, 150-page, everything you could ever want to know about Yosemite, extreme sports, backpacking, fishing. And I'm a historian for them in almost every issue. I'm writing original stories like this for them that take years and years to write. So if you don't subscribe to it, you might want to look into Sierra Heritage. Just look them up online because it is a beautiful publication. But anyway, I broke the story in that last year, and then I got Congressman Jeff Denham, who had Yosemite in his district, and I talked to his staff, and I helped them with a speech that he made in Congress. First time anyone had ever spoken about this woman and her role in saving Yosemite. The irony on all this is that there are best-selling books out on this woman. There was one in 1944. You go to the library, you'll see all sorts of books on Jessie Benton Fremont. Take a look at them. See if you find anything about her saving Yosemite. It talks about her being at Yosemite and stuff, but nothing about how this was pieced together. It's phenomenal. I went to the National Parks Promotions Council, and as a result, they put Jessie Benton Fremont on the cover of their Women's History Month newsletter. My son has helped me so much on all these ventures, and I thank you, Chris, because it's kind of like, two people trying to get this word out, and you hope you tell someone that you'll tell your neighbor and that sort of thing. There's a new congressman that just inherited Yosemite this year with all the redistricting that went on, Congressman Tom McClintock. He had Lake Tahoe, now he has Yosemite. And the thing that's interesting is that the very first piece of legislation that he did for Yosemite is H.R. 1192, and that is to get a mountain peak named after Jessie Benton Fremont. And the Sacramento Bee has even come out in favor of H.R. 1192. Who knows where this will end up, because you know how bills are. Sometimes they never leave the committees that they're in Congress. But anyway, it's kind of interesting because I brought a painting that's down here in front of me, and it's actually on the cover of an art book. They're two famous Yosemite artists who took my stories on Jessie Benton Fremont and wrapped them around their artwork that's in this book. It's just a phenomenal story. So anyway, I'll open it up to questions about her. If you have any questions.